All right, fans of the SEC, welcome to the very first episode of A Peek Inside SEC Football. Allie Peek joined by TJ Pittinger. We are going to talk all things SEC on this channel. Really, really, really excited. Something that TJ and I have talked about doing for a really long time. And even though he is not an SEC homer like me, I love to argue with him. So this is kind of the perfect setup, TJ.
Yeah, it's kind of reviving Peak to Pit a little bit. And so which is fun for the OG followers or listeners. They'll get that, and other ones maybe we'll explain that later. But yeah, this should be fun. I mean, there's some things we can agree on, but maybe balance you out a little bit because you are a little bit of a homer.
Listen, just because I know the SEC is the best conference in college football does not make me a homer. But let's talk a little bit about the SEC championship game. Wild that it ended up in overtime, which obviously we'll get there. But it's so interesting. You never really want to play a team twice, right? And I think if you do play them twice, you're almost in a better position if you're the team that lost the first time, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have it's just so hard to repeat, or to like you said, to win the second time. But if you're playing a team a second time, you'd probably prefer them not to be Georgia, right? And so, if you're going to play a team, if you're going to have to be a team that has to, but even you think about Georgia and Alabama and a lot of their rematches, that hasn't gone the way that the team wins the first time, like Georgia wins the SEC championship, but then loses in the Natty. And then same thing in reverse, right? Georgia wins the SEC, or, Bama wins the SEC, Georgia wins the Natty. And so I do think that there is something there with that matchup specifically. But then outside of that, I mean, yeah, really tough task for Texas. I thought it was weird that Texas was favored. I don't want to say that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, but I bet on Georgia. I just thought that it was more likely that Georgia wins than Texas. Now, it took a really weird route to get there, and certainly didn't feel great about that at halftime because of how the game was going. But yeah, I thought it was strange that Georgia wasn't the favorite, and getting them at plus money to me actually felt great. And I was like, yeah, Kirby is an underdog. Let's go.
Well, yeah, and that is the weird thing. The games on the field have to matter. Georgia not only beat Texas, but handily beat Texas. And I do think if you look at Kirby and Sark, and, this is probably being nitpicky, but I think Kirby's a better coach than Sark. And that doesn't mean that Sark's not a good coach. But with Saban out, I think I take Kirby over pretty much anybody, right? And, I don't know. Certainly when he has a chip on his shoulder, which it seemed like he has had this year, and we'll get to some of his snarky comments after the game later on as well. But, Texas was pretty dominant the first half of this ball game, though.
Yeah, I thought Texas was playing much better. However, they just didn't put Georgia away. Yeah. And that was, to me, that was the big takeaway of the first half, is especially, now hindsight's 2020, and we didn't know that Carson was going to get hurt. But if they had converted more in the red zone and they had put Georgia away like they should have, if they'd have gone to the half 13-3 and the backup was in, they're winning that game. I don't think Georgia could have done enough. Now, obviously, football still has to be played, and certainly Georgia is a capable team of coming back. They did it against Tennessee. They did it against Alabama, even though they lost that. Yeah. But I thought that the game was decided when Texas got into the red zone several times and missed field goals, had penalties, took sacks, had to settle for field goals. When they went to the half with only 6 points, and when Beck got hurt, you were like, well, they still have a great chance because Beck's not there. But when they went to the half with only 6 points, I mean, I was texting buddies and tweeting Georgia's winning this game. There's no chance that when you don't put Georgia away, that they're not going to come back and win. And that's exactly what happened. So to me, Texas's wide receivers were outplaying Georgia's DBs. I thought that Texas was running the ball decently. They didn't do that well in the second half, but Texas was dominating the game and went to the half up 6-3. And that's just a recipe for Kirby to beat you.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is that I don't know. And again, I think Kirby Smart's a really great coach, but I don't know that there is a better halftime adjuster than Kirby Smart. And I think, we saw that and you mentioned that Alabama game, and they did end up losing it, but it was the tale of two halves, right? Had that team that showed up in the second half, played like they had in the played that well in the first, they would have blown the doors off of Alabama. I think Kirby Smart makes adjustments better than almost anybody. And something that I think, Gator fans might actually be able to relate to here is that, Sark calls the plays, right? I think that makes it incredibly difficult when your head coach is your OC to make adjustments at halftime, because his biggest job as a head coach is addressing the entire team, right? You're firing them up. You're telling them you got 30 more minutes to play. You're telling them you're this close. You're on the threshold. And maybe that doesn't leave you enough time for the kind of adjustments that are necessary to beat Georgia for 2 halves.
Yeah. And I mean, you also just mentioned like Kirby being a better coach than Sark. Yeah. And I think the aggressiveness that Kirby plays with is a big deal. And I'm sorry, coaches with, they certain, well, probably did, back when he was playing too, but I do think that that's a big deal too. And again, Kirby can CEO it a little bit more. And same, both of our coaches calling plays. What does that take away from their just overall operation, their overall, and in game and then out of game, right? Roster management, NIL, and recruiting your own roster to come back in the portal and everything else. Like having to take the time of offensive install. It's not just in the games. I mean, it's big picture too. And why most coaches are going away from it. I think, there's a pretty good chance that both of our coaches for the teams that we cheer for probably go away from it for the 2025 year. And it'll be interesting to see if Sark does or not. But I also thought, as big as I thought Texas not putting Georgia away, I almost think that, did it feel to you like Texas was playing not to lose and Georgia was playing more to go out and get it? Because when the first drive of the second half, Georgia goes down with the backup and scores a touchdown. To me, I thought Texas was almost like shell shocked there. No, I mean, one touchdown, right? Like it was the difference in the game, but like one touchdown, like didn't decide the game right there. But I thought Texas just kind of thought like, okay, well now Beck's out. We'll be fine. We'll conservative our way to this win. And Georgia was the team that went out and took it. I thought that they played.
Absolutely. They went out and took it.
Yeah. They played more aggressively. And I almost feel like they caught Texas on their heels, almost caught them, I don't know, just they didn't seem like the more aggressive team. And I mean, they should have been. They were the ones playing without the backup. They were the ones playing with,
because Texas knows better than anybody how good a number 2 quarterback can be, right? With Arch Manning sitting there. So the fact that I don't know if they expected there to be a massive drop off, but like Georgia recruits just as well as Texas recruits at pretty much every position. So if you'd be okay if your backup was in there, you should make the assumption that Georgia's going to be okay too. And it's like that. It is like they were kind of surprised that there wasn't a massive drop off. And kudos to Kirby for continuing to be aggressive even when Beck got hurt. I think that shows a lot of confidence in your team, right? If your offensive leader can go down and you don't skip a beat, you don't call plays differently, you run your offense. I think that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, again, I just think it was more ballsy by Kirby. Like even the interception that Gunner threw, like Georgia was somewhat fortunate that didn't go back for a pick 6. They got the tackle, but there was nothing but green grass in front of that guy. And Texas probably wins if that happens, right? But they didn't. You might even say like, I don't know that you needed to be that aggressive, Kirby. Like just run the ball and take your field goal. But I think that even just in that, it felt like Texas was just kind of, Georgia was going for it and Texas was very much like dancing around it. I thought that, Texas drove down at the very end of the game and they did end up forcing overtime, but it felt like they were playing for overtime. It felt like their calls weren't very aggressive. They, running screen passes and the double reverse or the double fake, like the fake screen to this side, the fake screen to this side. And then he's looking out. Like against Georgia's D line, you just don't have time to do that kind of stuff. And instead of being tricky, like the slants were open all night for Texas. Like, why didn't you just continue to attack the Georgia defense where you were beating them? It felt like they got too cute. And then in overtime, I thought they did the same thing. They had like, they got inside the 15-yard line and they started throwing fade routes to the back of the end zone. And I'm just like,
I think this seems dumb. Cost them in overtime. But do you think that there's any world where this game meant less to Sark because they were going to the playoffs either way?
I think you wanted to win it. I think it actually meant more to.
I mean, Sark, it would be huge for Texas to come into this conference year one and win it. I think that would be a massive statement for Texas. But I think Kirby knows what it means to win this conference, and it's incredibly important to him as well. But it just, I was sitting there thinking, I wonder if, only the winner advanced, if Texas would have had a different game plan.
Well, yeah, maybe. But I think that because of the way that the format is set up now, there is less to lose, right? Like okay, well now Texas has to host a home playoff.
Which is
the 5 seed is still really attractive. And if both these teams win, like they're going to play each other anyway. And so I think that, it's not but to me, like this game should have meant more to Texas because of what you could have gained. Like everybody, Georgia's the team that just had to go to 8 overtimes with their rival, and Texas is the newcomer. And hey, we're planting our flag here, in the SEC, and we're here year one and did this. And it almost felt like they were aggressive in the first half. Now they didn't convert well; their execution was bad. But it almost felt like when Beck went out, they kind of took a foot off the pedal somewhat because I felt like they thought they could. Well, we're definitely going to beat the backup now, and they just didn't have that same aggressiveness.
Just have to mistakes or something.
Yeah, like it just, hey, they're going to give us a few. Let's be conservative, and that's where they really should have put the pedal to the metal because in that moment you lost to a backup at that point, right? Like the loss, if you'd have just lost to Beck because they were better than you, that's one thing.
Right
now they still got the 5 seed, so it's not like. I mean, how much did it really cost them? They got to play an extra game now. But, you certainly had a chance, though, to go out and beat a backup and get they'd have been certainly, they'd have been the 2 seed and Georgia probably would have been 5. But, yeah, I thought that, no, Georgia probably wouldn't have been at that point. But, it felt like, again, I thought Georgia was the more physical team and they were the team that played to win, even with the backup, kind of odds against them. And, but no, it should have meant more to Texas. Like, UGA was playing with a backup. Like nobody would have blamed UGA if they lost the game once Beck went out. They just said like, oh, that stinks. Hopefully he's back for the playoff. Like we get it. You lost a game with your backup. He'll be back for the playoff, but nobody's going to hold it against you to lose to a good Texas team with your backup. But so like once that happened, certainly this game should have meant more to Texas.
Well, Georgia obviously winning 22-19, but that overtime, first time that has ever happened in an SEC championship game. So we got to see a little bit of history in the making on Saturday. And I always like free football, right? I'm always here for the free football. But, Beck, I think, has had an interesting season. I just even look at the 2 halves of the Florida game. He made so many mistakes and was able to kind of come back from that and play better. And we saw that in the game against Alabama. Like I think you and I were talking during that game, like there's the deer in the headlights look that first half. And they surged the second half. They almost win. They look like a completely separate team. Is Beck, is there really as much a drop off as people think?
To me, Georgia's biggest problems are, it's really the talent out at wide receiver. Their weapons just aren't as good.
They lost a lot of guys to the league.
They lost so much. And so to me, there's it doesn't surprise anybody that there's like a slight regression, but to me, it's more of a confidence thing. And talking with people around Georgia, it's the fact that he knew he could throw it up to those weapons and not only do they lose guys to the NFL, you think about the tight ends and stuff, they've got guys that are in trouble with the law. They've got guys that are injured. Like there's a lot of talent that's not out there at wide receiver. They lead the country in drops. And you saw several drops again last night where that Georgia just cannot figure that out. And so I think it makes Beck play almost in this mindset of like, I've got to be perfect because these guys are going to, even when I'm putting it on them, they're dropping it. And I don't have the talent that I had last year. So I do think Beck has regressed some, but I think most of it comes down to the talent they've lost and just his mindset of like, well, if I'm not perfect, we ain't winning this game. The running game too, like Frazier's has struggled with fumbles. ETN's been banged up at times during the year. And so, they're just not as good. I mean, ultimately they've still got a really good defense, but they're not as dominant defensively. Their weapons are down, they're just not as prolific of a team as they've been for the last 2 or 3 years. And so I do think that that's a big deal too.
Yeah. We talked about how play calling in overtime for Texas, we didn't think it was that good. And then Georgia, ETN has his moment where he scores and, I'm sure that sticks in the craw of Gator fans, and kind of he told us he wanted to go somewhere where he could win championships. And that's exactly kind of how it played out for him. I don't think his stats this season are how he saw it play out, or, some of the injuries that he's had, but he got that moment that he said, he was looking for.
Yeah. And I mean, I get it. Right. And there's certainly, UF fans, anytime a player goes to a rival, especially, and we really haven't even seen it like this level of it. This is a different kind of level. I've seen it in basketball a little bit, but nothing like this, where it's one of the biggest, a top 5 rivalry in all of college football. And you've got a guy leaving one to go to the other, and looking at where both programs are. And in Florida, obviously had a nice end of the season, but at the end of the day, like ETN had 2 sub 500 years at UF, and now is an SEC champion, number 2 overall seed. Couldn't, from a program, again, injuries and production aside, from a program perspective, this is exactly what he wanted, and he got it. And it's, it's damning for UF because they have to erase that narrative, right? Like they have to somehow close that gap and start to get that back, because, I don't think there's going to be some mass exodus or anything, but what does that do for other kids around the country? Not just at UF, but just anywhere. If you're at Florida State right now, or you're at Michigan or Ohio State or Michigan or wherever, are you not looking at Oregon saying man, I'd like to be there? Or are you not looking at Clemson saying, man, I'd like to be there? So what does it do for other programs too, to say because it is just so easy to jump ship, but UF, kind of bias aside or fandom aside, I did think it was kind of a cool moment, because he had been through so much this year. He'd been through so much while he was at UF. It was cool that he was the one to end it. And in a really strong, just effort, like I said, Georgia wanted the game more, and they certainly were the more physical team. And that run was, again, very physical against a very good Texas front, where they powered their way in. And I thought it was a microcosm of really Georgia's season, of just willing their way to not only wins, but an SEC championship. So again, a cool moment. If you're a UF fan, yeah, certainly not your favorite thing to see.
Gonna be interested to see how this plays out kind of over the long term. And I will tell you, as a Gator fan, I don't think we missed ETN this year. Florida had a really deep running back room. I think Jaden Baugh kind of rose to the surface there. Webb before he was hurt. Obviously, Montrell, when he was healthy, had a good season. Jacoby Jackson was really well. Ran really well this season. If there was going to be a room where we lost somebody who's considered a superstar, I think this was the only room that could have happened, and they're not really skipped much of a beat. But what I'm interested to see long-term is how the NFL views this. Anybody that has gone through the draft process will tell you that most teams will talk to everybody in your life to figure out about you. They're going to talk to your kindergarten teacher. So if they're going to talk to your kindergarten teacher about the kind of person you are, they sure as hell are going to contact your old coach about the kind of person that you are. And so I'm interested to see, not just in the ETN case, but just in general, now that the transfer portal is open and so many people are jumping ship, for greener pastures, whether that's more playing time or championship or whatever else, how the NFL will view that when draft time comes around. And we really, we're just getting into kind of that moment.
Yeah, it probably makes their, evaluations even tougher, because they now have to talk with 17 other people, because the portal is
reason. Sometimes there's really valid reasons, right? And then sometimes it's, you think you belong on the field and the coach doesn't think you work hard enough to be there. And then you're trying to look at both perspectives and see who is right in those situations. It makes the NFL's evaluation process so much more difficult.
Yeah. And it's just going to continue on. It's not, I don't think we ever put the lid back on the barrel, or, however you want to look at it. The portal is here, and it is going to be just part of what we do.
Sure.
This better than I do, but did ETN leave with any, obviously nobody likes it when you go to a rival, but he wasn't there wasn't really bad blood there, or is it kind of we don't love what you're doing?
His teammates, still keep in contact with them, or at least that's what they have said, I don't think there's any massive blood. I don't know what kind of conversations took place with Napier, when he left or not. I know his mom has made some comments about like, well, you didn't want him to be RB1 and, things like that, which I don't think helps the situation when families kind of interject. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. The leaving for the rival thing, and part of me blames Napier for that, right? I think if you don't do a good job instilling that hatred of your rivals in your players, that's on you, boo. Because I can't imagine Eric transferring to Georgia or Florida State. The hate that Urban Meyer and Ron Zook instilled in them for those programs, that like zero chance. Now, that doesn't mean if he needed to transfer that he wouldn't have, but it sure as hell would never have been to a rival. So the fact that like that wasn't even a thought in his mind, that was totally fine, is wild to me. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just old school.
Yeah, I mean, probably a little bit of it, and so am I. Like we feel the same way, and we text during games, and we don't like each other the whole week of Thanksgiving and stuff. But like most people, I think that's just
we're gonna beat you.
I just think that that's different in today's game. I don't think it's gonna be harder and harder and harder, especially as more money comes in. You think about NFL rivalries. Like there's a couple, right? And they're old school, but like NFL
we're better than the NFL. That's why we love college football, right?
But as we get closer to that model, and as money, I don't think these kids are gonna care about the rivalries the same way. Now, I still think they're going to want to win, and it is going to be like we grew up playing those kids, and when Florida and Miami play, there's still a lot of kids that play each other, and you're still going to want to win for those reasons. But like a lot of these times, I don't think kids are growing up with that hatred of, and kids aren't always committing to schools because they love the colors or there's a lot of money involved, and there's coaches are in and out every 3 years. And so I don't know. I don't think that long-term passion, if you went to Florida State or Florida and Bobby Bowden and Steve Spurrier were there for decades, like you knew that history and you wanted to protect them and you grew up watching these teams. Now, I mean, you got coaches every few years, like kids don't even remember that kind of stuff. And so I don't know. I don't think it's the same now. And ETN's really probably just the first in a long line of what we'll probably see. I can't wait for the first like Duke Carolina. Maybe it won't happen because all these kids are one and dones. But I can't wait for like the first Duke Carolina transfer to flip over in basketball, and that just kind of be our new normal.
Yeah, I don't want to see that at all. Well,
let me ask you this too back on the SEC championship game real quick. Georgia has been so up and down at times this year, and then Texas. Texas's resume there, we'll talk about the playoff here in a minute, but some of the talking points coming out of the SEC championship game were just that, the game was somewhat underwhelming. And obviously it was still exciting because it went to overtime, but and maybe this plays into what we'll talk about in a minute, but to me, neither one of the teams felt super dominant in it. Yeah. And it just didn't feel like it didn't. And maybe this is me being the hater, and you can kind of balance this out a little bit, but it didn't feel like the over encompassing, like this game is for the national championship. Like the SEC championship usually feels like, right? Like this game, the winner of this is probably going to go. It just didn't feel like that. These teams don't feel like they're that caliber. And I know the SEC has cannibalized itself a little bit this year, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it doesn't feel like that team really exists in the SEC this year. To me, maybe you feel differently.
I don't know. Well, I do. I do think the SEC cannibalizes each other. And I think we were probably watching, there's a great chance we were watching the two best teams in college football, but I think there's so much parity across college football this year, different than maybe we've ever seen it. Right. And so I think that's some of what you're seeing, but you watch that game, and then I watched the conference games that happened later in the night. I watched the conference game that happened earlier in the day. And there wasn't anybody I watched that I felt like was better than those two teams. I just think those two teams are very evenly matched.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Oregon, offensively looks.
But they don't play defense. So, I mean, they're going to run up.
We don't have time.
Any points to Penn State.
We don't have time for defense in 2024. We've left that in
this conference disagrees.
I do think when we talk about the playoffs here in a few minutes, it'll be interesting, and then when we get to the playoffs to see how some of these teams do match up. So,
you see Kirby's comments after the game?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was great. I'm here for the shade. I'm here for the petty. Now,
But he's wrong, first of all. So, and for those of you sitting at home, if you didn't, keep your TV on during the trophy presentation or whatever, but Kirby essentially was asked by Laura Rutledge, what does this bye mean to your team? Because when you secure the SEC championship win, you are going to end up with a bye in the playoffs. And he said, essentially that they got the rest that they didn't get because Greg, and he's referring to Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, Greg and his people kept sending us on the road is essentially, what he's saying, implying that their schedule was so much harder, was set up in a more challenging way than maybe everybody else. But that's ridiculous. I'd have to pull the numbers, but something like they've played the last 6 games, I want to say, either at a home or a neutral site game. And then obviously this one is played in Atlanta, which might as well be a home game for Georgia, particularly if your opponent is Texas, who's got to travel quite some ways. And he's standing 3 feet from the commissioner as he's saying it too.
Who was staring off, absolutely steaming at the fact that he was saying this. I mean, to be somewhat fair to Kirby, right? And, he's a master manipulator with convincing his kids that they're underdogs when they're the most talented team
all the time. They're like,
they did play on the road at Bama, on the road at Texas, and on the road at Ole Miss. And then obviously their rivalry game every year.
But the joke for the last decade has been that Georgia never gets any hard.
Absolutely. They never play. I agree with that. And their schedule is always trash. But he was right about this year. Like, they had their 3 toughest games on the road.
And next year
they get them all at home.
Toughest games at home.
But I thought it was. But I liked I liked him giving him a hard time.
TJ, it does not surprise me that you are here for the petty. I feel like you're.
But you weren't. Like, you didn't think that was a little bit petty, like fun. I thought that was a good little. I didn't think it was like super down or anything.
Hilarious dog in this fight, but I just please, world's smallest violin is playing for you. Oh, guys, if you are watching with us live right now or you're watching the replay later on, please make sure that you are subscribed to A Peek Inside SEC Football. We want to get those numbers up, as many subscribers as fast as possible. We're going to have a lot of content coming your way in the coming weeks. Really, really excited about this channel. Really excited to dive into some of these SEC programs. And listen, now I want to talk about Bama a little bit. I don't hate Bama like most SEC people. I have a massive respect for what Saban did for Alabama. I don't know. I don't hate Alabama like everybody else does. And I do think that Alabama got screwed.
So tell me why. Because we're going to argue about this, which is fine with me.
I know we're going to argue.
Why did they get screwed?
And I will preface what I'm about to say by the fact that I don't think anybody with 3 losses has a massive argument for being left out of the playoffs, and I do, when it was 4 teams, 5 and 6, we're going to throw a fit. When there's 12 teams, 13 and 14 are going to throw a fit. If we go to 64 teams, 65 and 66 are going to throw a fit. There is not a scenario where we fix this, where there's not somebody that complains at the end of the day. I do think having 3 losses makes it, less of a great argument. But if we're arguing between SMU and Alabama, while I don't know that there's a perfect answer, I still think we picked the wrong one here. I think Alabama has better wins than SMU does. I think they play a tougher schedule. And I think at some point, we have to reward these tough schedules. Otherwise, what is the point in playing them? The SEC beats up on each other all year, every single year. And then we get in a situation where we get, all SEC championship games, which has happened several times in the last decade. We get, we get these bowl games where the SEC is dominant. It's because we play harder schedules during the regular season. But if you're not going to give a nod to that, what is the point of some of this challenging outside conference scheduling that we're trying to do?
So what makes it tough is that it is so subjective. And if Alabama had lost games, What's tough to me is to use the strength of schedule argument. Alabama, to me, would have needed to lose some of their tougher games, right? And Alabama's problem, to me, is not that they lost to the Georgias or to the good teams that they played. They lost to the bad teams. Like, they absolutely show the propensity to go out and lay complete stinkers. And to me, if you would have lost to a Georgia, we could buy that. Oh man, they lost to. It's almost like losing good games is more important. And so
I think
that's
it's
where I
lost to Oklahoma that did them in.
absolutely and even Vandy, Vandy,
it's different.
Vandy was better than we thought they were this year for sure. But if Alabama just takes care of business as a double-digit favorite, Vandy doesn't go to a bowl game. Like right. Vandy's 5-7. And same thing with Oklahoma. As a double-digit favorite, Alabama went and got absolutely blanked. Now, if that game happens early in the year, probably helps Alabama some because they finish on a winning streak. But I think that that's what's tough is you got blanked as a double-digit favorite against a bad team. Again, if Oklahoma loses that game, which they should have, Alabama should have won that game. Oklahoma doesn't go to a bowl game. And so this idea of, I think they would beat SMU in a head-to-head matchup. They'd probably be a favorite. But I also think that right now South Carolina would beat Alabama in a head-to-head matchup. And so why? And I know they played head-to-head, but Ole Miss beat South Carolina head-to-head matchup by more than Bama did. And so who do you put it at some point? The wins and losses
and SMU though. If you're down to those two, that Bama has more losses, but also has the better resume. Strength of schedule wise. You look at those two teams. If I'm on that committee, the next thing I do is say, okay, if those two teams play 10 times, what do I think the outcomes would be? And truly, I'm asking you that question. These two, Alabama and SMU play 10 times. What's the outcome?
I think Alabama wins more than they lose.
Right. And I think that is important.
But the problem is the results on the field have to matter some too. And that's where the system,
Alabama's schedule. Do they only have one loss?
But it's not. But I don't think you can
schedule. Do they have any loss?
Probably because SMU played better teams than Vandy and Oklahoma. So yes, I would say they probably have a couple.
But does SMU beat Georgia? Do they beat LSU? Do they beat
Vandy? Do they beat Oklahoma? Here's the problem. If you hypothetical the whole thing out, at some point the results on the field do have to matter. And you're right. But the problem is there's no perfect way to do it. Yeah. Because yes, Alabama definitely played a tougher schedule than SMU. There is no doubt about it. I haven't seen one person argue that. But at some point, your losses to Vandy and Oklahoma have to matter. Like you have to take care of your own business before worrying about what somebody else's business is. And what I would wonder is at 11-1, are this hypothetical game of I think Alabama would win if the two teams played head to head on Saturday at a neutral site. Yes, you can hypothetical that away and say that that's the case. But then I would hypothetical that other teams would win too, right? Like I would hypothetical that Bama would probably beat Notre Dame and that they would probably beat Indiana. But then at some point you have to make the results on the field what matters. And that's what's tough to me is
until you have parity in schedules, you have to have the ability as the committee, unless we're going to just go to a BCS formula, which listen, I had zero problem with the BCS formula. I would go back to that in a heartbeat. I think people sitting around, watching it on TV without even beer or chicken wings, by the way, is an asinine way to do this when there's actually a computer model that we can use to figure it out. But if the schedules are not equal, then you shouldn't weight them equally. I don't think it's fair to say all wins and losses are the same because they are not.
And I'll say this, I don't think the committee did. I think at 11-1, they said 11-1 is more valuable to us than 9-3 with the losses being against Vandy and Oklahoma. Like to me, that's what the committee did. They said, because if it had been 10-2, versus 9-3, I think you saw that with Alabama and Miami. There's a reason that Miami was behind Alabama. They said, okay, one loss, and it happened to Florida State last year too. Alabama just had one less loss than Florida State, and they were in over them, right? So I think at one loss difference, the SEC gets the nod. And you saw that with Miami. At two losses of a difference, that's where I think the committee said, okay, at some point we got to, what if Alabama would, because Alabama could have lost to Georgia in that comeback, and I still would take Alabama over SMU head to head. And so there has to be a cutoff at some point.
We set the precedent today that playing in a conference championship, regardless of the strength of that conference, matters more than your regular season strength of schedule. And I think that is a very dangerous precedent to set. But, I think we're going to continue to tweak this model moving forward, right? This is the first year we did it. And I have more complaints than just Alabama being left out.
So, but going back one sec, if Alabama would have lost to Georgia and finished 8-4, would you still take them head to head against SMU?
Yeah.
So where's the line? What is and that's the problem. There is no answer. The problem is we have an imperfect system because Alabama could have lost to Georgia and been 8-4, and you and I would still both agree they'd probably be favored against SMU on a head to head.
Who wouldn't?
But how many say what?
I said, who wouldn't? Florida State.
Well, but at what point do you say, okay, you got to stop losing games? I mean, Alabama could have gone 6-6 this year, and they'd probably still be favored against SMU head to head.
Schedule, and that's the whole point. They play a tougher schedule. They're a better team, so their win-loss record looks worse, but they're still a better team because you gave them harder games. And at some point,
so why even play the games?
Games.
So we should just look at the strength of schedule at the beginning of the year in the recruiting rankings and just put those teams in. We shouldn't even play the regular season game.
Better job with scheduling parity, or we got to give more weight to the harder schedules.
Well, I think they do give more weight, and that's why a 3-loss Bama team is at. I think that's why a 3-loss Bama team is ahead of a 2-loss Miami team right now.
I also think we got to stop saying I understand it's a fine balance, right? Between saying we don't want to make the conference championship games irrelevant, right? We don't want to make it so a team doesn't want to play in their conference championship game because it hurts their playoff chances. But I also don't think it's right to automatically say, if you're in it, you're not going to drop out either. We're going to continue to tweak this. This is year one. Also, I would like to go on record as saying I didn't want to play off like this, but here we are.
Yeah, I think it's tough to think that you would penalize a team for playing in a conference championship. And even SEC coaches were saying that, right? I think that.
But if you play in a weaker conference, I don't know. It's got to be, you've got to look at all of these factors. You can't just make a blanket statement. Playing in it, you can't drop. I mean, what if SMU had lost?
SMU did drop. They just didn't drop out.
If they had lost by 20 points, are we having this conversation, do you think?
They probably get left out in that situation.
Yeah.
But to lose on a last-second field goal, in a game that they looked really good for a half, I don't know. I don't.
Well, as I said at the very beginning of this, it's hard to argue that a 3-win team belongs, right? a 3-loss team. I understand that it is not, the Alabama doesn't have a perfect argument. I just think we had a lot of imperfect solutions, and I think we picked the one that was more imperfect.
The real argument is not, to me, about Alabama SMU. It's about the system. The system is stupid because Alabama, for all intents and purposes, Alabama should have been in. Clemson shouldn't be in right now.
Well,
there shouldn't be auto bids. You can't be terrible all year and luck your way. I mean, Clemson was lucky that that Syracuse beat Miami the last week of the year, because if we'd have had an 11-1 Miami against an 11-1 SMU, that is much different, and we'd probably be having a different conversation about Miami's offense and the teams they've beaten, things like that. It'd be very different. In fact, in that situation, I think both the ACC teams get in that situation too. But for Clemson to luck their way into this thing and then steal a bid. It's just like basketball where somebody steals a bid on the last day that had no chance of getting in. The argument to me really shouldn't even be SMU and Alabama. It's like Clemson doesn't deserve their way in. Yeah. Now, Clemson didn't set up the playoff. Alabama didn't set up the playoff. Well, the SEC and the Big Ten actually were really pro like auto bids. We shouldn't have any auto bids. Just rank the best 12 teams and put them in. Like I don't.
We never agree, but I agree on this. It's asinine. Like so, I was looking at the rankings. So when you get, when you get past 1 and 2, which Oregon and Georgia were 1 and 2, Texas was actually 3, but Texas gets the 5th bid, which fifth place in the playoff.
That's stupid.
It is stupid. And
Boise State 3. I mean, like, can we not? Like, what is that? Like, why is Boise State 3?
Penn State goes from 4, which is what they finished in the final rankings, but they're seeded 6th because that's the way that it plays out. Notre Dame at 5th falls to 7th.
And if we're playing this game of like who the better team is, like who are you taking on a neutral site between Clemson and Boise State? I put Clemson ahead of Boise State right now, and I don't think Clemson should be in, but I'd put Clemson ahead of Boise. Like, why is Boise State 3? Like, that's so dumb to me.
It is.
And, maybe they go out and upset somebody. I don't know. But why is Boise State 3? That is so dumb.
Yeah, I think you rank them 1 through 12 and you give the buys to 1 through 4. And that's just the way that it works out. And conference champion, not conference champion. And conference championships, I think, should be looked at as almost like you play your way in as opposed to you can play your way out, if that makes sense. And part of that has to do with the way that the committee phrase things week in and week out when they meet in these rooms and they release these polls. And we all know that the poll at the end of the year is going to look different than what they told us in the previous weeks because we watched that happen with Florida State last year, right? This is all for TV, essentially. But stop telling us that you can't be penalized if you lose a game. Just tell us, hey, if you win, you're going to be in. If you win your conference champion, there's a great chance you're going to be in this playoff. Like, phrase it differently. I shouldn't be guaranteeing anything.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the auto bids because, again, Clemson finished 16th in the rankings. Like, they shouldn't be in. Alabama was
screwed. Alabama's 11.
Yeah, the committee put Alabama in. Like, let's be honest.
Right.
The problem was that Clemson stole a bid, right?
Correct.
And so you shouldn't have auto bids. Again, I think it's dumb. There's no reason that, Boise State should be 3. I liked Arizona State yesterday. I thought they looked really fun and maybe they can get hot in the play. Who knows? But like, they're not the 4 seed. Come on. Like, I think they should be in. I think they should probably get to host. But I don't know that they should get a bye right now. Now, based on the way the bracket is set up, yeah, certainly. Yeah, they're one of the top 4 seeds. But I don't, I think that just now, again, this is the SEC and the Big Ten were the ones that fought so hard for the auto bids. And so that worked out really well for the Big Ten because they got 1 and to me, the easiest path. And they got 6. They got the 1 and the 6, but
they got teams in, which,
well, yeah, which probably is a larger conversation of like the fact that they didn't add really good teams that cannibalized the league. They added one team that was really good, and the rest of their league is it's just much more top heavy, right? They've got 3 or 4 really good teams and then a bunch of crap, right?
Yeah,
and the SEC has 7 or 8
really good teams,
average teams, and probably less elite, by SEC standard teams, but 7 or 8 teams that could win anytime, anywhere, at any point in the country. Right. So, hey, if you're watching this, do us a favor real quick and make sure you hit the subscribe button. We'll argue a little bit more here in a second, but we do appreciate those that are watching live or on replay. Certainly do appreciate those that tuned in and chatted with us. So the SEC gets 3 teams in, Allie, not 4 like the Big Ten, which we were just talking about. Yeah. Is Georgia again, we talked about this when we talked about the SEC championship game, but I don't know that I have a pick of obviously there's so much uncertainty around Beck. There's questions. Yep. I thought Ewers didn't play super well. And then Tennessee has been very hot and cold. I think if Ole Miss would have gotten in, they would have been my pick to maybe make some noise, but I really don't know, thoughts on these SEC teams that are in the playoff this year.
I think all of these teams had the ability to make some noise. I don't know that I look at this entire field. I've got it sitting in front of me. I don't know that there's anybody that I'm like, oh, dang, that team is running the table, which does make for an interesting, playoff season. I think when you look at that first round, Ohio State, Tennessee is the most intriguing game out of them to me. I think Tennessee has the ability to be so good, but then we've also watched, just moments of, does this team belong in the top, echelon of the SEC, not even just college football in general, but just even within the conference. I think Texas is really sitting in a good position. They get Clemson first round. I don't think that will be close. And then they get Arizona State, which I also think that they will play really well against. And so I think that's 5 has a pretty easy path this year's schedule. And I think Georgia has a pretty damn easy path as well. You're talking about, either Notre Dame or Indiana. I think that they would take care of business against either one of those teams. And then, either Boise State, Penn State, SMU, two of those will play, obviously, Boise State getting the bye. I think there's a great chance we see a third Texas Georgia game.
I don't know. I'm a little less confident. I think, I do think it's going to end up being Texas, Oregon. Like, I think Oregon, I think Tennessee going up and playing
semifinals, right? You think that'll be the semifinal game?
Yeah. Oregon, like if I had to pick it right now, Oregon, Texas would be my semifinal.
Yeah.
I do think Tennessee, they've been too hot and cold for me to really have a lot of confidence there.
I don't think Ohio State's great this year. Tennessee.
I don't either, but playing in Columbus on like a couple days before Christmas, like that. We've always wondered, like the SEC teams going up and playing in cold weather. I wonder about this.
SEC schools is to never be in a situation to play in this weather. So it is really, a really interesting thing. And, something that I also think will be something to watch during these playoffs is that, round one, the host schools get this game on campus, right? Which I think is phenomenal. How cool is it that we are going to get to see some of these matchups? So Ohio State, Tennessee, and the Shoe at night. It's an 8 p.m. game at the end of December. That's what dreams are made of, right? That's freaking wild. I wonder though how quickly we change, because the teams that get a bye don't get to host on their campus. So I bet we very quickly move to rounds 1 and 2 being on campuses, because it's you get the bye game, but you miss the opportunity to host, those once in a lifetime games at home.
Well, I don't know if they can make them both on campus. I think they might flip them, because obviously the Rose Bowl and the Peach Bowl, like those bowl games are going to want to be played somewhere. But I agree. Like, I think not that I think Boise State necessarily deserves to host a home playoff game, and maybe the same with Arizona State. But if we were ranking them properly, just 1 through 12, I would just flip it. I would have the first round be neutral site, and then give the advantage to the Georgias and the Oregons and the teams that won their conferences.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that Tennessee, I do think Texas wins. I agree with you there. And then I think they beat Arizona State too. It would be pretty surprising to me. Although I do think that Texas is a little bit kind of like Tennessee. Like they've won the way they needed to. I believe this is the stat that Texas has played 5 of the bottom 7 SEC teams. Like
I believe that's the stat, and I think that's accurate.
And then their losses have come against Georgia, which they played one really well and one not so well. The one they did play well was against a backup again. So I don't know. I do think Texas beats Clemson, but I don't know what my confidence level in Texas is, but I like them against Texas and Arizona State. I think Ohio State wins though. I think Ohio State beats Tennessee. But I do think that'll be a good game. And then the only thing about Georgia that, concerns me is I think Notre Dame wins. I think Indiana's not very good. All this talk about SMU and stuff is, it's all the same stuff I feel like could be said about Indiana. But if Beck is not there, I do think Notre Dame's playing some of the best. And I know they lost to Northern Illinois early in the year. I think Notre Dame's playing a lot better right now. I think they're blowing teams out. They're playing the way they should. They actually play really, really well, really physical. They run the ball well, and their defense is good. And if Beck is hurt and not able to play, that's my only concern with Georgia. Because if not, I do think Georgia finds their way. It'll be Georgia, Penn State, and Georgia probably ends up beating Penn State in the semifinal to go to the championship against, God knows who, Texas, Oregon, who knows at that point. But if Beck's not there,
yeah,
it could be disaster city, right? Like, yeah, we'll see what that Gunner kid can do with a month off, but that's probably the biggest concern at this point for Georgia is just his health, and we probably won't find out until game time on the 1st of January. But that's probably my worry with Georgia.
Yeah, I mean,
I think Notre Dame's playing well right now.
Yeah, Notre Dame is playing well, and I think a Georgia-Notre Dame matchup is what a great game. I have far more interest in that matchup than Boise State playing either SMU or Penn State. Like that's kind of, I don't love that. I do think Texas takes care of business against Clemson and Arizona State. Tennessee is more my wild card. I think Tennessee can beat Ohio State. I think playing up there, we don't know what the weather is going to be outside of cold. Right? Theory, no, I don't know. 8:00. I know Ohio State's going to be excited to have a night game. They've played all those noon games this year. Tennessee's not going to be intimidated to play in a stadium of that size. They play at a stadium that size at home, right, on a weekly basis. But that's going to be an interesting one. That's definitely the bracket that I think is the hardest. I don't know. Whoever comes out of that bracket has the hardest run, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think that Clemson is going to. But again, this is why Clemson shouldn't be the 12 seed, right? Put Boise State at the 12 seed. Texas, and we both think Texas is going to beat Clemson. But Texas having to play Clemson first round instead of Boise State first round, like that is infinitely more difficult. Like Clemson hasn't been a great team at all this year, no doubt. They still recruit so well, and there is enough talent on that Clemson team to where they can make that a game. And where honestly, it should be a pretty entertaining one for at least a half. Whereas the Boise State game would just be over by half, by the first quarter, and Texas would just move on. Obviously playing Clemson is much tougher than playing Boise State round one. Yeah. And so, can Clemson pull an upset? I don't know. Probably pretty unlikely. I think they're like an 11-point dog, so not impossible, but certainly not going to pick them. But, out of Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, there's the Texas-Oregon matchup to me would be the most fun, though. Yeah. Like that, give me the best from the Big Ten, give me this SEC team, and go from there. That would be what's fun. And then the same thing over here. I think that if Beck is healthy, Penn State, Georgia is probably the most fun. Like Penn State actually looked pretty good last night.
Gunner looked pretty good. I don't know that Beck has been such a roller coaster this entire season. I don't know that I think it's as big a loss as people think it is. I don't know.
I think with an entire month to prepare,
I think Kirby Smart could get anybody ready with an entire month to prepare.
Yeah, I think a defensive coach, though, with time to prepare, like you had to play Gunner with no notice.
Did you find it somewhat ironic that they sent out a one-armed Carson Beck instead of sending out a Jaden Rashada for
I don't know why they didn't just call a timeout, because you obviously get timeouts in overtime, but you call a timeout, you get, the player can go in. But I would have thrown the ball. I'd have done a pitch play or something, just to rub it in. But yeah, I don't know. Who's your pick to win it at this point? This is tough. Okay, before you give this, I am not a fan of the 12-team playoff at all. I think it's stupid. This 12-team playoff is going to be so much fun. Like even these matchups we're talking about, like we think Texas is going to win. That's still a pretty fun matchup. Like,
right?
Texas Clemson's really fun. I think SMU Penn State's really fun. Like two offenses that just were going off last night. I think Tennessee Ohio State is fun. Indiana Notre Dame doesn't excite me a ton.
I would go to Ohio State Tennessee. Like if somebody was like, which of these first rounds do you want to go see? I would get on a plane
I go to Texas. The other
in a second.
I go to Texas. The other three are too cold.
Because I've seen Texas this season, so I'm ready for something else. But I just think I don't know. That is what college football dreams are made of for me. December in the shoe, a Big Ten SEC matchup that we almost never get to see. I'm down for that.
So who's winning it? Georgia?
What?
Who's winning this thing?
At this moment, I'm going to say Georgia, but I think there is probably 3 to 4 teams when I look at this that have the ability to win it.
Yeah, I don't know. This is tough. I'll take, I don't know. I'll say Texas, or whoever wins between Texas and Oregon, to me, wins it. But I'll lean Oregon just to go anti-SEC for you.
Of course.
I'll take the team that's 13-0. Really going out on a limb there.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah. All right. This was fun. This was a good first show.
Yeah, this was good. We're going to do this a lot. So if you liked it, please make sure that you are subscribed. We're going to be back real soon. And the good news is we've got lots and lots of football to talk about in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it just gets crazier and crazier as we go. If you liked it, make sure you subscribe. If you didn't like it, please make sure you message Allie on Twitter, and she'll handle all complaints there. So thanks for hanging out. This was fun.
All right. This was a good time. See you guys soon.